All right, we're going to start with chapter 5 here. Chapter 5 is about the tissues. Tissues are made up of cells. We just got done talking about cells. So chapter 5. So, what makes something a tissue? It's a group of similar cells that have something outside of them, called an extracellular matrix. Sometimes there's some material outside of them, and they have a common function that they perform. So, for example, some tissues are made for providing protection. There's a specific study or a field of biology called histology, is the study of tissues. And you could choose to take that class someday if you desire. And there's 4 main types of tissues. There's epithelial tissue, there is connective tissue, and those are the 2 big groups. Then there's muscle tissue, and there's nervous tissue. And they vary in their structure, what they look like, and then their functions. First, we're going to talk about the common features and functions of epithelial tissue, and then we're going to learn how epithelial tissue is named, and then we'll talk about specific types of epithelial tissue, examples of where you can find those, and then we're going to talk about glands that are often found in epithelial tissue called exocrine glands, and what's the difference between endocrine and exocrine glands, and then we'll talk about how exocrine glands are designated based on anatomic what they look like, and then their physiology. Okay, so epithelium is also referred to as epithelial tissue. Its definition is it's one or more layers of tightly packed cells makes up an epithelium. There's little to no matrix or area outside of the cells because they're so packed tight together, and epithelial tissue covers body surfaces, so on the outside, and it also lines body cavities, so it lines the digestive tract, it lines your bladder, and it forms the majority of your glands, your sweat glands, your oil glands, things like that. So again, the cells are tightly packed cells. The polarity, so means there's 2 ends to epithelial tissue. The apical surface is exposed to some kind of external environment, like your skin, for example, the external environment. But if we're talking inside the digestive system, so lining your small intestine, for example, it's also exposed to an internal open surface, the inside where the food is going through your small intestine. And then on the apical surface, sometimes you'll have microvilli or cilia. And then the basal surface is the attached surface. So if you have a free end, this would be the free end. You have an attached surface called the basal surface. And underneath epithelial tissue, so right underneath is connective tissue. What epithelial connects to is the basement membrane. That's the barrier, the area between the epithelium and the connective tissue. If you've ever skinned an animal, you know that you can take off the skin and separate it from the tissue underneath. This is an important term. Avascular just means without blood vessels. Epithelial tissue does not have a great amount of vasculature, so blood supply is lacking. But it does have extensive innervation. It can respond to stimuli and sense things. The best way to think about it is think about your skin. You can detect hot, cold, pain, for example. And it also has a high regeneration capacity, so it can replace cells as needed, when needed, and at a high rate. Your skin cells you need to replace often. And how often your body replaces them is due to necessity. And how are they replaced is by stem cells that continually divide. So here is an image of some things I've been talking about. So this is epithelial tissue up here. This is the apical free end. So this is on the outside. The basal surface is attached here. It's connected to this area called a basement membrane. And beneath here, this is the connective tissue. So that's a separate section. We'll talk about that. So epithelial tissue is up here. You can see the nuclei of the cells, and the cells are all smashed together there, tight, very tightly packed. Epithelial tissue, its functions generally are to provide physical protection, external, internally, protect your body from dehydrating. Your skin is a major factor in that. Abrasion, getting cuts, or getting destroyed. Your epithelial tissue is selectively permeable. Some things get in, some things don't. There are secretions that are released from epithelial tissue. Outside the body, you're familiar with sweat and oil. Also, inside the lining of the digestive tract and your respiratory system, mucus is released. When we know that epithelial tissue senses things, contains nerve endings, so little extensions of your nervous system. So I already mentioned temperature and pain, but pressure as well and touch. Cool thing when we get to anatomy 2, we talk about special senses, smell, hearing, all those things. They have special epithelium that allow you to taste and sense other things. So your body has different types of epithelia, and they're classified by two-part naming system. 2 names for every epithelial tissue. The first name comes from the number of layers, number of epithelial layers, so layers of cells. And the second name comes from the shapes that those cells have or take. First of all, so classification by number of layers. Simple epithelium is 1 layer of cells, so 1 layer thick. All the cells then have a free surface, and then below it, they're attached to that basement membrane. You're going to find this type of epithelial tissue where the stress on those cells is very minimal. So they're in areas where epithelial tissue filters things, absorbs things like oxygen, secretes things like hormones, or other products. So like lining of your air sacs of your lungs, your intestines is going to secrete chemicals to help digest food. Blood vessels to allow passage of gases. Stratified, then, if simple is 1 layer, stratified is more than 1 layer. Okay, so two or more. So we have a free surface, but only the bottom layer of cells. The bottom layer of cells is called the basal layer. Isn't only that is in contact with the basement membrane below it. You're going to find this tissue in areas of your body where you have more mechanical stress, more pulling, more twisting, because you want that tissue to resist wear and tear. So the skin is a great example of where we find that. The lining of your esophagus, because many things pass through there. Same with your urinary bladder. So we have multiple layers, right? And if I had more hands, they would go down. The cells in the bottom layer are continually made to replace cells at the top. And it just keeps going and pushing up. A special designation of cell layers is called pseudostratified. This is interesting in that it looks stratified, but it's not. So that's the false, the pseudo. So it appears layered, although it's not. It appears layered due to the nuclei within the cells are at different layers, or distributed at different lines of vision. So therefore, it is a simple epithelium, although it looks stratified. So it's called pseudostratified. Lastly, so that's the first name, simple or stratified, and then it also can be pseudostratified. And then epithelial tissue is named by its cell shape. Squamous cells are flat cells, irregular in shape. They have a nucleus that's flat as well. It looks like floor tiles. So simple squamous tissue would be 1 layer of flat cells. Cuboidal cells are cube-like. They're about as tall as they are wide, and they're a little rounded in the edges. And the nucleus is right in the center, nice and spherical. Columnar cells are column-like. They are longer more than they are wide. Their nucleus is oval. And then, just to throw a wrench in there, some cells transition between 2 cell types. They're called transitional cells. The only area that we're going to talk about that these are located is in the bladder. When the bladder is relaxed, the cells are more cube-like. But when your bladder is full, it's stretched more, causing those cells to be flat. So therefore, this tissue is transitional. It goes back and forth between those two shapes. And here is an image of what I just talked about. The simple layer, the stratified layer, and the different shapes of cells. Squamous, cuboidal, and columnar. And this organizes all the different types of epithelial tissue. Simple squamous, simple cuboidal, simple columnar, pseudostratified columnar, stratified squamous, stratified cuboidal, stratified columnar, and transitional. You can also see that stratified squamous has another layer to it that we will talk about. So that is what epithelial tissue is for and how it is named.